Let's get some more perspective on the broader picture of what is going to be the balance of power in Washington from someone who has lived and worked in New Jersey and has lived and worked in Washington, knows about power there. Former Republican Governor of New Jersey, Todd Whitman, joins us now. And Governor, thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate having your insight here.
Good to be with you, Bill.
Okay, let's talk. I'm not going to talk about any specific races because we don't know yet, and the polls have just closed, unless you want to talk about Senator Blumenthal. I was more interested in what your opinion is right now of the sort of balance of power, what we expect to happen, and really what's happening to us as a country and where we stand.
Well, I think what we're seeing is that there are a lot of people who they're splitting their ballots. They are voting on issues that are important to them. But we see over and over again from every poll how frustrated in general the public is with their lack of choices with just a Republican or a Democrat. And certainly these elections have been as nasty. The ads have told you nothing about really who the candidates are or what they're going to do once they get in office. And I believe the public's getting really sick and tired of that, which is why I'm part of the effort to start it's a movement now, but we are going to get on the ballot, be a party called forward.com, to just give people a third choice in these elections and enforce the candidates, if we change the system by supporting open primaries and ranked choice voting, to support the candidates to talk to everybody, not just their base. I mean, this is all about obviously getting out the vote in your base, but what it leads to is politicians who don't want to solve the problems because they can use those issues to excite their base to get them out to vote. And that's what they want to do. But we deserve better as the American people.
You've started this Forward Party this last summer with Andrew Yang, who ran for mayor of New York, also ran for president, and a former congressman as well, a third person from Florida.
David Colley.
Yes, David Colley. Do you not consider yourself a Republican anymore?
Well, I've still registered as a Republican because Forward's not on the ballot yet, but I will change my registration to Forward when I have the chance, because the way the party, first of all, I don't think there is a Republican Party in the traditional sense anymore, because to do that, you have to have a central core definition of what you stand for, where you are on the major approaches to government, if not some of the issues, not every issue. You don't have to be firm on every issue. But we don't have that. The Republicans didn't do that in 2020 when they had an opportunity at the convention to draft a platform. They didn't do it. So what they're saying is that whatever Donald Trump says is important, that's what's important to us today. It may be different tomorrow, and that's the way we are. So that's not a party.
Last night, on election eve, the former president, Mr. Trump, had a rally. And he said, I'm not going to take over the spotlight here at a rally. And then he said he's going to make an announcement, a big announcement from Mar-a-Lago on November the 15th. A poll that he cited says that 71% of the Republicans want him to be the presidential nominee of that party. How will your party deal with that? Will you be taking votes away from him, or would you be taking some votes away from the man who says that the Democrat he's going to run, perhaps he likely will run, that's President Biden?
I don't know that we will even be a player in the presidential election. Look, there are 500,000 elective offices across this country, and fully 70% of them are uncontested. That's just wrong. Everybody should have a choice. And we are going to, in this election cycle, we supported Democrats, Republicans, and independents as long as they believed in our basic principles, which are respect for the rule of law, support of the Constitution, thriving communities, economic opportunities for all, security at home and abroad, and a willingness to change the electoral system so that we can get different outcomes than what we're getting today. And that means ranked choice vote, supporting ranked choice voting and open primaries. We do not want to be spoilers. And where there is a race where there's someone who is a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent who believes in our principles, we'll stay out of it and support them.
We just want to give the breaking news, no surprise here, of course. The call has been out. We have now called for the victory in Florida of Governor Ron DeSantis, who is the current governor, and he's now beaten his opposition. Let me ask you this. When you hear that kind of news, the governor of Florida, who is perhaps a rival of President Trump's, President Trump today was asked, would he appoint Mr. DeSantis, would he ask Mr. DeSantis to be his running mate? He said, no, I'm not going to tell you who that is. But there are some people who are saying that might happen. What would that mean for your party, your new party, the Forward Party? What would it mean for Republicans?
You mean the man who was created by God on the seventh day Ron DeSantis, I don't think that's going to change anything, frankly. We're talking seriously about people that care about our democracy and the rule of law. And if you have candidates who don't support are still election deniers, as Ron DeSantis is, he continues to say that the 2020 election was stolen. Those are people who don't believe in our electoral system. And we've got one of the best in the world. Right. Are there glitches? Of course, we're human. But nothing that's ever happened that would show that you would overturn the results of an election.
You gave a presentation at Axios Forum last week, and you said something very interesting that I saw on that, and it said that part of me hopes the crazies do win, and I assume you meant of your former party, Republicans. What did you mean by that? And do you really believe that, or is there part of you that hopes that, quote unquote, what you call crazies win?
Well, as I said, the rest of that sentence was, yes. But then just so they'd learn what it's like under what they think they're getting, because they won't get what they think they're getting. They will see a very, very different country. And I think our democracy is really in danger. And I also said, but then a nanosecond later, no, I don't want that to happen, because I don't want to live under that kind of a government. And I don't want my grandchildren to have to, or my children.
But so many of those people you were talking about had already lived under some of that, which can be head spinning and give you.
Yeah, but that's different than what we're talking about here. Because what we're talking about here, you've got elections across this country, and they look like they're going to turn out in a way that I think is very dangerous, which means we're electing governors, secretaries of states, and states attorneys general who oversee, who have a great deal of influence on how elections turn out, who don't believe in our electoral system. They don't believe the 2020 election was free or fair. You've got a gubernatorial candidate in Wisconsin who said if he wins, the Republicans will never lose another election, because that means they're fixing things in a way to make sure that people who don't agree with them just don't count anymore.
And these were, in fact, election deniers, to be sure.
Right.
I have a question for you, and then I'll let you go. And I appreciate you taking time tonight, Governor. George Pataki, a moderate Republican like you were. And I assume you thought he was a decent guy and liked him. Listen, he's the governor of New York for 12 years. He said over the summer, and I don't want to get into the weeds about each race, because I know you don't want to do that, but he said over the summer, anyone who is going to let Donald Trump ride on the back of his candidacy, your candidacy, anybody's candidacy, will not win. And yet here he did, in fact, endorse one of the candidates for governor of New York. Is it a contradiction, or sometimes party just takes over?
Well, clearly party takes over, and party loyalty and other factors. I mean, he could have real, and I'm sure he does. I know him well enough to know that he thinks through these things very carefully, and he has real reasons as to why he would endorse any particular candidate. And they will be based on policy and what he believes to be the right person for the job.
Christy Todd Whitman, thank you. Good luck with your third party called the Forward Party. It's starting to get off the ground sometime after this race. Keep in touch, and I appreciate your insight, Governor.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Good to see you. Thank you.